I'm joined by Pamela, Elaine of the Progressive Army. And thank you, Pamela, for your patience. I know I'm about 15 minutes, a good 15 minutes late. Thanks for joining me to discuss your article. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me on, Ben.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I wanted to talk to you because your article, your most recent article, has some very important points that I think the people should hear, as well as go and read. Go to theprogressivearmy.com and read this article. It's about the ever increasing criminalization of protest. Tell us a little bit about what you wrote and some of your key points.
Well, the situation that happens is as we watch these protests going on, one of my Twitter followers mentioned to me that this was sort of a setup to keep us preoccupied while there's other things going on behind the scenes. So as we protest, and you get a lot of news coverage for that, which is great. People are out there, getting their voices heard. But I was starting to see these little laws come up in different states
Mm-hmm.
where they're pretty much criminalizing protests, and they're changing the terminology used to describe a riot.
Mm-hmm.
They are enacting laws that give the police more protections in dealing with the public. And as we all know, that when you start dealing with the police, they show up for certain protests in riot gear, like we saw today out in North
Anaheim.
Dakota
Mm-hmm.
with the water protectors. So as these laws come up, it gives less and less power to the people to be able to be heard, because protesting is pretty much the last salvation we have to be heard individually, because we see that the voting process is slanted against us. We see that you've got to kind of juggle what media you can trust and when, and it just becomes this knot of the going to the courts and not knowing who's actually there for you, listening to the duopoly we have with the different political factions. And it's just scary to see how much they're changing this, but it's very kind of on the down low. It's very
Mm-hmm.
low key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed in some cases they and actually no, I just saw this today, and I think this came out after you wrote your article, that they are going to start allowing the seizure of property of protesters, even if it started off as a peaceful protest and then turned violent. They're doing these very subtle things that really can go unnoticed. That when you add them up all together, it is the criminalization of protest, one of our fundamental rights as American citizens. What are some of the most disturbing things that you've seen? What are the things that have stood out the most to you that says this is a red flag that people need to be aware of and concerned about?
Well, I think two things happened that kind of jarred me, and it was one of them was in, I think it was Louisiana, where they passed the law where resisting arrest would be considered a felony now. It's a hate crime and a felony. And then you had the reporters who were arrested while they were documenting the violent protests at the inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
They were arrested within, just with the rioters, and you see that attack on the press. And I think that's where we sort of focused, was that it was an attack on freedom of the press. But when you think about it in totality, you get this picture where if you're involved in a protest, if you resist arrest,
Mm-hmm.
which could be a sit-in,
Right.
if you don't let the cops arrest you readily, or if they yank on you and you pull back, now you're being aggressive, and now they can up the charge to a felony. And then we have this rat back program that the FBI is running, and what it does is it allows them to keep the information that they track on people and provide it to employers. So if you join the program and you want to see what Sarah did over the weekend, if she was involved in the protest, she may have done nothing more than sit there, but now she's charged with a felony, and you lose your job for just voicing your opinion and making a stand. So it was kind of a line of action that, though these things are in different states, it's happening so quietly. When will Louisiana pick up one of the other laws? And I think they were criminalizing that they were forcing kids out of college if they were involved in a riot. but they changed the definition of riot so that that would encompass more people.
Right.
And you know that there's this attack because, you know, colleges are the liberal bastion where they go to, where we, you know, brainwash all the children
Right.
to liberal ideology. And so when you look at that in linear and see what could happen, it gets very scary.
And here the thing about it is here's the truth is that a lot of these laws are going to end up being, or could and should end up being, deemed unconstitutional. But the problem is twofold. One, it's going to require someone to get arrested and charged and possibly even sentenced underneath these. Actually, I believe all the way to sentencing underneath one of these laws, which means that individual's life has been ruined. And then it's going to require a long appeal process that will go all the way to the Supreme Court, which means that there's going to be a long gap between the time these laws are instituted and executed and the time that it even gets to the Supreme Court. Problem two is Donald Trump is getting to make up the makeup of the Supreme Court, and he's getting to put people on there who, if they are ideological, more ideological than they are adherents to the Constitution, could just as easily say these laws are constitutional. So, you know, even though we have a recourse and the ACLU can get involved because we've given them millions of dollars over the last couple of weeks, it's still a possibility that there's nothing that we could do in these scenarios. What was your conclusion? What are your lasting thoughts from this article that you wrote?
Well, and I was going back to what you said at the beginning of the show with the prison pipeline. That definitely feels like where we're going, because if they need to fill those beds, the incentive to keep arresting people, and then we also have this trend to where, if you follow the Justice Project, where people who are low income and are sort of forced to confess to lower crime so that they can get off, but then they end up going to jail for, you know, 2 years instead of 10, but now you still have a record.
Right.
And so that's where I kind of see them filling those beds, making more things illegal, while they're also on the flip side making sure that everything is sort of geared for them to come out on top. I mean, it's just the same game. I mean,
yeah.
You hear the Hitler thing so much for the past, 15, 20 years that it kind of becomes numbing. But when you look at what's actually going on now, it seems to fit.
It's definitely an onslaught against our liberties, our constitutional rights, and it is definitely a step towards authoritarianism, and that's not hyperbole, right? I know a lot of people say, the comparison to Hitler is over the top, but at a minimum, you can't look at this and not see that this is a step towards authoritarianism, right-leaning authoritarianism, and fascism most certainly falls in the category of right-leaning authoritarianism. Pamela, thanks so much for joining me. Tell everyone how to get up with you.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Goddess Pamela. Some people apparently love that on some of our comments on my articles. And you can usually find me on Facebook.
All right. Thanks so much for
Pamela Elaine.
Pamela Elaine on Facebook. Pamela, thanks so much. Everyone go over there and check out that article so that you can read what's going on and make sure that you're aware of what's going on with the criminalization, the encroaching criminalization of protest.